Testing, testing. You guys on the remote side, can you chat and let me know that you can hear me?
I can hear you.
Awesome. Good deal.
Ready? Hello? So I was asked to introduce Gavin Andresen. I'm pretty sure you guys all know who Gavin is. If you don't know who Gavin is, then I'll tell you. Google him. So Gavin used to be the lead developer of Bitcoin. He stepped down and he is chief scientist, correct? Chief scientist for the Bitcoin Foundation. Let's see what else about Gavin. So he's one of the few that's actually spoken with Satoshi, and you haven't.
Never spoken.
Well, I mean, messaging, sent and received transaction from Satoshi. And lastly, he's one of the few people that's more famous than me. Welcome, Gavin Andresen.
Cool. So I hear there are going to be questions.
Yeah. So audience Q&A. Go for it.
Can you summarize the Scaling Bitcoin conference outcome and your general thoughts for next steps?
Sure. So it probably won't surprise anybody that the real progress at Scaling Bitcoin all happened in hallway conversations and just meetings of minds between important, influential people. And I think all of that actually was pretty productive. So coming out of the conference, I'm cautiously optimistic because it became clear, I think, at the conference that the maximum block size has to be increased. I think going into the conference, I think maybe in some people's mind, they maybe were thinking, yeah, we don't really need to. Maybe these other solutions will happen. But it was clear at the conference that all the big infrastructure companies need this to happen, right? And need it to happen fairly soon. So I think that became very clear to the the other core maintainers of Bitcoin Core. There was a big kind of cabal-like meeting of the minds that happened, where kind of I think we see a proposal that maybe everybody can be equally unhappy with. And so right now, Jeff Garzik was trying to figure out what we should say about that publicly. So I think on the Bitcoin Dev mailing list, hopefully, fingers crossed, if everybody can agree to say something, that will be said in public. I hate cloak and dagger stuff, so I'm going to be pretty open about what we talked about. We talked about a hard fork to increase the maximum block size. We talked about scaling up from where we are now to something fairly big, fairly rapidly. We talked about not trying to plan too far in advance, because I think the consensus was trying to plan 20 years in advance is scary. So there'll be some 4-year schedule of block size increase. And then what happens past 4 years, that'll be up to people to decide 4 years from now. We also talked about not talking about the block size as much, but more talking about the resources required to validate blocks. So current plan is there's going to be another BIP written in public on the dev mailing list that has those kind of rough parameters, and then I don't know how we're going to bike shed the actual parameters of how quickly it goes up, what goes into it. The technical idea would be it wouldn't just be number of bytes in the block, it would be some linear combination of how much hashing do you have to do to validate signatures, how much does it increase or decrease the unspent transaction output set, because that's a concern, and then how much CPU usage in terms of signature operations. So instead of having a block size, there'll be kind of this other limit that will be essentially equivalent to a block size, but may give people more room to kind of optimize their transactions, because we want to incentivize transactions that are quick to validate, that aren't super expensive. So that was all very positive, and we'll see if that holds together as the debate is taken from this group of 12 people sitting in a room to actually public debate on the mailing list. But the goal is before Hong Kong to actually write a BIP, implement it, start test the hell out of it, and hopefully in Hong Kong be able to kind of give it to the community as this is what we think should happen. Oh, and I should say part of that deployment plan was actually to pick a date and say, there's going to be a fork date. So everybody in the ecosystem needs to agree as of this date, we're going to switch to this new rule for how many resources a block can have. Just different from the miner voting that's been proposed. There was a general consensus that we don't want kind of miners to be the deciding force, right? It takes everybody, it takes exchanges, users, and miners to come together and decide and come to consensus. So that's what came out of it. As I said, I think that's a good thing. Devil will be in the details, right? There'll be a whole lot of bike shedding. I'm sure there'll be a whole lot of Peter Todd saying why it can't possibly work. But I think we can get past that. And hopefully, over the next couple months, we all start rowing together and it actually happens.
Cool. I guess real quick, one other question is, if that goes forward, then it sounds like the current core developer will stay roughly the same, and it won't be a move to XT, but it would be like potentially a BIP in the current core.
It would be. I mean, XT will probably continue as a fork, just because there's stuff the core doesn't want to do that XT does want to do. But XT would support that, whatever that BIP is.
So that was my other question, which was one concern we've expressed beforehand is just that it felt like there was a slowdown in how fast new features were happening in core, and part of what was exciting me about XT was that there might be a new blood or new generation of people pushing things forward faster, like new opcodes could come back, or the double spend relay. All those features felt like development just generally slowed down. So if there is still the same group of core devs, you have a concern that it will be a slow development cycle.
Yeah, hear me tapping my foot. So, I mean, the whole block size debate is kind of one area of concern. Kind of the speed of development and innovation is another thing that I've been concerned about for quite a while, ever since I've kind of stepped back from lead. I think a lot of that slowdown has been just there's been a lot of code churn, trying to create a lib Bitcoin consensus. It's just the consensus parts of Bitcoin. And I mean, just in the last day or two on the mailing list, there's been a lot of discussion about, what can we do about this code churn that's happening? And I don't know, I haven't talked to Vladimir about, or the other core maintainers about, come on guys, we need to kind of control this more. I think some of the core developers haven't, most of the core developers, we haven't had experience running open source software projects. I haven't had experience running open source software projects in the past. Jeff Garzik has, and I'm hoping that Vladimir and the other core maintainers listen to Jeff, because I think he has some really good ideas about kind of constraining the churn so that productive work can happen. I think that, as each of the other developers kind of runs into this problem of the code changing out from under them and doing all sorts of busy work to try to keep up, I think it's becoming very clear that that does need to change. So I think that will change. If it doesn't, I think some other fork of the code base that doesn't have that problem will take over and will become popular and will be where all the innovation happens. I think that'd actually be okay. I don't think there needs to be just one code base. I think we'll be healthier if there are multiple.
Yeah, agreed.
This is a question from the remote team. What do you think about the thought of removing the limit entirely, since large blocks will tend to get orphaned due to long propagation time?
Yeah, in my heart of hearts, I think that's actually correct. But I can't prove it that it's correct, and I think it's too scary to get general consensus that that's what should be done. So I don't think that's going to happen. I think if I proposed it, I think we would lose half the core developers or more. It's just, that's a crazy idea. I mean, orphan rates are a weird thing because we think we know how to have basically infinitely sized blocks that propagate infinitely quickly. So, relying on the way the network is now and the way the network propagates blocks now is probably not the best idea. But even so, I think that even if we did get to there, I think there would be other limits on how large blocks would get that would just naturally limit things. But again, I don't think that could get consensus. So I think that's a non-starter.
So we've had a little bit of internal discussion about Ethereum and Bitcoin and how they sort of play in together. I know you wrote a blog about it, but what we're hearing from you engineers is that they're more interested in building on Ethereum. It seems easier to get started with. Bitcoin currency to them, and there's all these regulations and conversations. So what are your thoughts about how that looks in the future? And maybe if you could sum up what you said in your blog, it would be helpful as well.
Yeah. Now, I always start from use cases, right? What are you going to use the system for? And most of the use cases that I can think of for smart contracts, things that people talk about with Ethereum, can be done pretty darn well with kind of trusted oracles, right? This notion of, if I have some contract that depends, I mean, the interesting contracts tend to depend on some real world piece of data, right? The price of oil, or the Bitcoin exchange rate, or whatever. In which case, you need some trusted source of data, and so like a federated data source of 11 trusted sources of the Bitcoin exchange rate, and I'm going to pick the average of 6 of 11 or whatever. All that kind of stuff can be done just using kind of multi-sig technology that's in Bitcoin. You don't need all of this machinery that Ethereum gives you. If you think really deeply about it, I talked to the Blockstream guys about this a little bit. The only like purely on-chain stuff that gets interesting is like gambling applications. I don't really care that much about. But if you wanted to do it in Bitcoin, like add an opcode that's a pseudo-random number generator, and you could even get most of those happening on the Bitcoin blockchain. So I actually, and that may be proposed. We'll see. So I think, I think Bitcoin will evolve, and we're seeing that with things like the Lightning Network, right? So Lightning Network there will be a couple more opcodes added to the Bitcoin script system to support the Lightning Network, which gives us a whole bunch of things. There are just a couple more opcodes that maybe we could add to Bitcoin that would give us a lot of Ethereum's functionality. And I think that's the way things will evolve. And I think there's a lot more, now that Ethereum's there as kind of a competitor, I think a lot of engineers are thinking about, what could we kind of easily add to Bitcoin to take away a lot of their thunder? So we'll see how that evolves. I don't know. Ethereum in general, I think the jury's still out as to whether it will kind of collapse under its own weight. There's a lot of stuff there. And whether it'll be like easy enough to create secure contracts that mere mortal developers can actually create a secure contract. Just chatting, saying how at MIT there's a professor who's giving a presentation about a rock paper scissors Ethereum contract. He had like 6 slides, each one showing all the different ways that, like, if you wrote it naively, either your money would get lost or your money could get stolen. And just a really simple, like, rock, paper, scissors. I'm going to throw a rock, and if you throw paper, then paper covers rock. Paper wins. And so I think if you think along those lines of, where is it going to go? I think you might end up at a place where you have kind of like an app store for contracts, where they're like, I don't know if it'd be Ethereum doing the certification, but some certifying body saying, yes, this contract is secure and we stand behind it, and you can use it for up to, a $100,000 transaction. And if it goes bad, then, we will take the blame because we audited the code. But if you go that far, if you have that model, these kind of semi-trusted entities, then suddenly the Oracle model becomes just as appealing, right? That there's some Oracle that's just signing transactions saying, yes, the conditions of the contract have been met, where the contract is just some hash that gets submitted to the Oracle. So I don't know. We'll see how things evolve.
One thing we've been thinking about for next year is how can we dramatically increase the number of apps that are built and tried out there? And Fred had this great observation that there's probably like 100 people in the whole world who know how to write Bitcoin script and create custom transactions. Yet some of the more interesting stuff that's coming out, like Lighthouse with their escrow model, or premium payment channels, or Augur, and a lot of them are using custom scripting, but we're seeing maybe on the order of 5 or 10 interesting things a year right now, whereas we want to see 1,000. And so we thought about, maybe there's some analogy like creating an IDE or something like that for people to write custom transactions. We haven't seen anything like that pop up on the internet where it's like, or maybe there's templates, like here's an escrow template, a payment channel template, and then you can start to edit it. And I guess what we were wondering, is there anything you think that, one more analogy that we thought of was like for the web browser when it first came out, and people added JavaScript, which was like this hacked together crappy language. And then over 10 years, it became a huge deal, and people write entire applications now in JavaScript. Before, it was just like a playground. So is there anything you think we could do at Coinbase to try to help there be 1,000 new Bitcoin apps created every year instead of 5 or 10? What are those developer tools that we could put great UI around, or app stores around, and that kind of thing?
I mean, things like a trusted data source, or trusted. I mean, like running an Oracle that's trusted to do certain things. I think, I promise to only sign and coming up with maybe buy a company was it that was doing this. I don't know. There's some company that was trusted Oracle, whose name I've forgotten. And just giving developers some for example applications to bootstrap them. I think that would certainly help. So if I want to do a futures contract on the Bitcoin price or something, I don't know if you want to go there. There are all sorts of SEC. I'm might get into trouble. But you can imagine prediction markets, futures contracts. I'm not sure what other kinds of applications, but it seems like often there needs to be a trust anchor, and being that trust anchor, or making sure that there is a trust anchor that is actually trustworthy, and pointing people at it. I think that kind of thing could really help bootstrap a lot of applications.
What do you see as the biggest non-technical block for mass adoption of?
Well, that's easy. It's how do people get Bitcoin? Right? If you don't earn them as part of your paycheck, how do you get them as part of your everyday life? Right? Because I don't think most people are going to want to go out of their way to acquire them. So there needs to be some way that you're just naturally kind of getting a trickle of Bitcoins into your Bitcoin wallet. I think before we bootstrap into everybody gets paid their salary in Bitcoin, we need more ways for ordinary people just to get them, to acquire them as a part of kind of your day-to-day life. And since today most mainstream people get all of their money through their paycheck, maybe they get dividends from investments. That might be another neat way if you could get dividends paid in Bitcoin. Another neat way. If Lightning Network takes off, Jameson Lopp, I think yesterday said, if Lightning Network does actually take off, then using some of your accumulated Bitcoin savings to fund a payment hub might actually be a safe way of getting a return on your Bitcoin investment, which is an interesting idea, right? I mean, and that might actually incent people to take some chunk of their wealth and kind of park it in Bitcoin, and then have a trickle of income that they can then spend. But getting that kind of trickle of income, I think, is key to it becoming really mainstream. I mean, until then, it's going to be investors, maybe international travelers who, don't want to visit the currency exchange machine or cheap and don't want to pay the credit card fees. So yeah, I mean, ordinary people getting Bitcoin, I think, is a huge barrier now.
So just kind of building off of that last question about the non-technical challenges, what do you think the largest technical challenges facing mass Bitcoin adoption?
Just scaling up right now. Well, I mean, there are two things, right? Wallet security, scaling up. I mean, I'm seeing lots of great innovation in wallet security. Not that worried about it. We see hardware wallets happening. Coinbase's products that let you choose security versus convenience. I'm not actually that worried about the security side of things. I think that's happening. But yeah, giving room more transactions, I think, is the biggest technical challenge, and that's why I've been pushing on this block size thing quite a while, because I do see that as the next highest technical priority.
Gavin, My question is, what are your current thoughts about Bitcoin XT? And are you still trying to push for Bitcoin XT to get supermajority, or do you feel like you can now accomplish your goals?
Oh, I think the jury's out a little bit. I want to see what happens with this new BIP. So I've kind of stepped back. I'm not going to be pushing for people to run XT until I see, does this other thing happen? If it does happen fairly quickly, then it's better, right? Consensus is better, even if maybe I don't think it's as good as XT for whatever reason. Consensus is really important. If it bogs down in just and nothing happens because it gets bike shedded to death, then I'll kind of step back on the accelerator for XT and say, let's get this done, right? So the Hong Kong conference is supposed to happen in December. Happily, we're not, still have some breathing room in the block size. We don't have a whole lot, but we have enough that I'm comfortable kind of stepping back and waiting and seeing, and I'll probably even help write code. There's a spec to write code too.
How do you think we need for a Bitcoin?
I mean, if there was like broad general consensus, everybody came together and said, yeah, this is what we're going to do, I think it could be done in just a couple months. And then depending on how controversial it is, scale that up. So, typically soft forks take about 6 months to roll out. Non-controversial soft forks take about 6 months to roll out. I think the hard fork, so much higher priority or so much higher visibility, I think you can actually get it done quicker, right? And there'd be alert messages on the network, and so I think you could get it done in a couple months.
I have a question on more of like a personal note about how you've adapted to all these changes and stuff. So I'm curious whether, I don't know, you've made this big shift from being like a developer to being a consensus builder or something like that, and more of a public figure. And there's a lot of drama and all this stuff out there, and you're more just having to like convince people of ideas rather than code solutions. And I was just curious, like, is that what you want to do or not? And is that why you stepped down from the role a little bit? Yeah, I'm more just curious, like, two things really, like, what do you think Bitcoin ultimately needs? Does it need like a Linus Torvalds type figure that's like for each fork that's kind of being more of like a benevolent dictator, or do you think it needs something different? And which one are you?
I think software projects need benevolent dictators. I think protocols don't. And so right now, Bitcoin it's both at once, right? There's been this reference implementation that is the protocol, and it's one and the same. Everybody's running the reference implementation, and I've been calling it the reference implementation for years now. That implies there will be other implementations, right? And I think there should be other implementations. And I think the common protocol needs to be a common protocol, which there is no dictator. But I think each implementation does need a dictator. You need somebody who ends the debate, who steps in and says, yes, we're going to use CMake and not AutoTools because I like CMake better, right? I mean, those are the kind of decisions that don't matter. I see engineers chuckling, exactly that debate, right? And so I think software projects do need benevolent dictators. Protocols don't. Going forward, we are going to need some governance model for how does the protocol evolve? How do we come to consensus? How do we decide? I actually don't want to be the guy who's like the center of that when other people who have had experience doing that to figure out how to do that. And other people have had experience doing that. I mean, this is well-trod paths, how technologies and protocols scale up and evolve. What do I want to be doing? I want to be contributing to a lot of different projects. I still like writing code. I want to be like writing code that maybe is like one step ahead of where we are. So this is like the block propagation IBLT stuff. I've been doing a lot of research on optimal gossip protocols and gossip networks, all sorts of cool academic research there. So I want to be like doing that kind of putting research into practice, making prototypes, maybe even writing production code, maybe not just for the reference implementation, but for other implementations. That's what I want to be doing. That's kind of that's how I see my role going forward.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think it makes sense. Like each fork would probably need a benevolent dictator, and then the protocol is really the fork that wins. It reminds me a little bit of like free markets, where you have a CEO of a bunch of companies and they're benevolent dictators, but the market, people voting with their dollars, decides which company wins. I think it's really kind of interesting that you're like a very reluctant leader of the Bitcoin movement, is my impression, but you are kind of the leader that everyone looks up to, even if you don't want that job. And I guess like, I don't know, I think it'd be cool to have a world where you actually are the benevolent dictator of a fork, at least, and then whichever fork the miners vote becomes the protocol. Does that make sense, or do I have something wrong about that?
That makes sense. I mean, ideally it would be, we have and actually it's even true in practice today, right? We have different versions of Bitcoin Core running on the network, and they can disagree with each other, right? We have had forks where different versions disagree. We narrowly missed the fork with BIP66, where actually the same implementation running on 32-bit hardware would fork from the same implementation running on 64-bit hardware. That's what BIP66 was all about. And in which case, it would be majority. So ideally, you have 3 or 4 or 5 or 11 different implementations, and it's whatever the majority is. And that probably won't be one implementation in the future. It will be like, 2 of the 11 implementations have a common bug that causes them to fork themselves off the network, and then they'll just fix the bug and come back on the network, and that would be fine. That's nice and robust. I've been thinking about maybe starting a fork of Bitcoin Core. Very targeted, very focused, doesn't try to be everything to everybody.
Other than XT?
Other than XT, probably, yeah. I don't know, it's a lot of work, so I haven't convinced myself that it's a good idea to do it.
Isn't XT already that, or is it not?
XT still tries to be a strict superset of Bitcoin Core. So, for example, XT includes, the GUI wallet. I think there needs to be like an industrial strength implementation that's just designed to run in a data center, designed to be fast. It can have this requires 5 gigabytes of memory to run. Sorry, you just have to have 5 gigabytes. We're just going to assume that you have 5 gigabytes of memory because all our phones have more than that. And it's not unreasonable to require that you have 5 gigabytes of memory. And then you can optimize it so that it processes transactions really quickly, processes blocks really quickly. It speaks whatever protocols that people who run these things in data centers want them to speak. I don't know if that's based on RPC or something else. And that actually, understands that the customers for this thing are people running nodes in data centers, right? Not Joe random user running a node at home. I think Bitcoin Core tends to try to listen to everybody and try to make everybody happy. And I think you can't make everybody happy. I think you need to have a customer.
Yeah, I mean, we don't run Bitcoin Core. We run something like that was like a kind of crappy V1 that I wrote like years ago, and it's still limping along. And we actually have a team of 3 people starting on the next version of that that's designed to run a data center in about a couple weeks. So if you want to do it, we're going to start doing it one way or the other in 2 weeks. Maybe you want to collaborate with us.
Definitely have them ping me because I have ideas on how to make a really fast transaction and block validator.
Jim's heading up the project starting in about a week or 2. So
cool, sounds exciting.
So given that, what do you think of the rise of cloud Bitcoin mining?
I wrote a blog post. Did I tweet or blog post about cloud mining? I mean, cloud mining is a really bad idea for a lot of reasons. I mean, it's really hard to tell, is a cloud miner a Ponzi scheme or not, right? It's pretty trivial to say you're cloud mining and just be a Ponzi scheme. Theoretically, yeah, you could, like validate the blocks that you're generating and prove that you actually are doing the hashing that you say you're doing. But there's also the economic argument of, all right, if I can, do all the work of setting up these miners in a data center, be profitable at it, why don't I just take the Bitcoin? Why would I let somebody else take part of that profit? And if you want to get investment, then get investment, right? Don't try to do this kind of end run around investment rules, which might actually turn out to be just your Ponzi scheme, right? To try to invest to get the investment to get the hardware. So I'm pretty down on cloud mining. I mean, that said, I have been tempted to like find an honest cloud miner and mine some XT blocks, but I haven't.
A lot of altcoins have been able to do crazy experiments with various constants and even like alternate implementations. Do you have a favorite altcoin or one you think that's
I like
something
Dogecoin.
really cool?
They just have such a cool attitude, man. Cute little dog. They gave me a T-shirt, so I do like Doge. And what's interesting to think about altcoins is, think about your currency as the statement of like, social values or something. And I've said before, I can totally see, like the environmentalist having some green coin that's, like solar power certified miners are allowed to participate, and you can totally see like people wanting to use this green coin as their currency because it like says something about their values. And before the whole altcoin phenomenon, I'm an engineer. I would never have thought that like you would use your currency as an expression of who you are. And for me, it's just money, right? It doesn't matter. But I think it's interesting that I think there are a lot of people who might find that appealing. And I think, in the future, we might actually see currencies that are, Patriot coin for, nice U.S. patriots, and there's all sorts of government-approved stamps on it, so you can't use it overseas or something. I don't know. It's only made in American products you can buy with Patriot coin, and environmental coin and other things. So I think that'll be an interesting phenomena. I can totally see it happening.
So you mentioned that you think Bitcoin could take off when kind of everyone has some way that they're getting Bitcoin in their daily lives. How much do you think that is? There's camps that think people are going to be trading Bitcoin as money, so you probably need some substantial amount of money, and then there's camps where but there'll be meta protocols, so really you're only going to be trading around bits. They just going to be Bitcoin like a layer to data or kind of camp you.
I think for human-sized transactions, I think it's perfectly capable for Bitcoin to scale up in 20 years, assuming technology keeps growing at the exponential growth rate that it's been going for the last 50 years, to handle all human-sized, what we think of as ordinary transactions. I think there will be a whole bunch of machine-to-machine transactions that are teeny tiny, that we don't see, and those will happen in some higher layer. And I think those transactions will be valuable. And I think kind of our human-sized transactions will sometimes get translated into these teeny tiny payment streams, like paying for bandwidth maybe, right? I have my $10 a month Wi-Fi bandwidth account. I just put $10 in a month, and then as I walk around, I'm paying all sorts of whatever device I'm holding is, using that money to make gazillions of machine-to-machine payments to pay for Wi-Fi as I walk around. I can totally see that vision of how things will work in the future. But I think there will still be kind of on the human level, they'll still be mostly Bitcoin transactions. I may be wrong. I don't know. Maybe Lightning will take off and everybody will just have a Lightning balance and we'll all be payment hubs and we'll fund it so that we get some return on our investment and just use that form of payment all the time. I tend to think, I don't know, I tend to be in the keep it simple, stupid camp. And right, the simplest thing is I have some Bitcoin, I own some Bitcoin, and I just spend some Bitcoin. There's no layers in between.
Over here. I want to say thanks, Gavin, for being a judge of the hackathon. My name's John. We emailed a bunch of times, but related to non-technical people of getting everyone Bitcoin, I guess the flip side of that is everyone wanting use for it. So on the hackathon, there was a bunch of apps that didn't use our API, which was fine. We realized that there were certain things that we couldn't do developers. Similarly, I think we've seen trending of Bitcoin to Bitcoin transactions go up broadly and have it mirrored as close to one Coinbase user base. We have a hunch that perhaps there are good use cases for consumers out there that are prone to them anonymous or not that customer stuff that we require. How much do you think, one as an individual and Bitcoin enthusiast, but slightly separately as an advisor to the company, pay attention to that and play in that world, but we're allowing distance between customers. Is that a massive opportunity?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like if I take the 10,000-foot view of like what consumers want, I don't see a whole lot of consumers saying they want a whole lot of privacy in their digital lives. Even with all the hacks and breaches and, I mean, convenience, yeah. Low cost, yeah. But we're all happy to like tell Facebook everything about us. We're not all, right? I mean, I'm sure there are a bunch of people in this room who, through Facebook, I don't want them to know who my friends are, right? But that doesn't seem to be common, right? That doesn't seem to be where people want to go. Maybe it'll be different with money. Maybe people are more private about their financial lives. Maybe it will take, like a major bank breach where all of Bank of America's customers' transactions are published to the internet. That hasn't happened yet, but I could totally see it happening, right? I don't know if it'd be Bank of America or Wells Fargo or some other big bank. But I mean, maybe that's what it would take for people to decide. Yes, I do want Yes, I do want an electronic cash. I don't think right now the demand's there. I may be wrong, but it just seems to me people are much more about cost and convenience rather than privacy. And I've heard that companies are actually more concerned. So if you're looking to sell to companies, it seems like giving them a way of ensuring that even if some way that like their security guys can't point to any one place that could be hacked, where like they have some huge breach that exposes all of their customers' data. I think that's actually a pretty big selling point. I think that's in the short term at least. That's more interesting place for privacy.
Hey, Gavin. Thanks for coming. One thing that we've been watching a lot is like, what are the new interesting apps that we think coming out or will come out? I feel like there's been like one of the big promises of Bitcoin has always been this idea of right? But when we kind of look at the landscape of apps that we feel like are really making use of programmable money or like the language embedded in Bitcoin, and has this already been asked? It feels pretty limited. Like you look at like Streamium and it's like sort of fake, like micropayment channels, or Lighthouse uses some script stuff that's like less common. Abra even like is a little bit more complex, and I think they even have their own like separate like coin to make the entire system. And then like there's this other crazy thing of like Ethereum going on over here where it's like Turing complete, you can do anything Magic Land, right? So I guess the question is like, does it surprise you that there's not more interesting, what I would call like protocol level innovation occurring at the app layer in Bitcoin yet? And do you think that it will ever be super interesting?
I think like Lightning is super interesting. But I think that's the super interesting thing right now. I think it's just this idea of this decentralized. You can do millions of payments off chain in a trustless way, in a way that there is no. It's not centralized in any way in the same way that Bitcoin is. I think that's actually pretty exciting, and I think that could enable a whole bunch of really interesting things to happen. Remains to be seen whether, again, consumers can. If it'd be compelling to consumers, I'm guessing it won't be compelling to consumers. It might be compelling to some businesses who have needs for high transaction throughput. So I don't know. I tend to think at a very low level of kind of what core capabilities could the Bitcoin network accomplish that would really leverage a whole lot of applications. So like, for example, there's no messaging layer in the peer-to-peer network right now. Probably should be. Right? There should be a way, if I'm transacting with a person, there should be some secure way of me sending you a message about that. It's also decentralized and distributed and doesn't rely on me sending email. That's like a core capability of the network that I think the core network could handle, could support, and we could make it so that it's robust and can't be spammed and works. So that's the kind of. So I tend to think on those like very low level. What are the capabilities that could enable all sorts of interesting applications? And I don't spend a whole lot of my time thinking about what those applications might be.
Yeah, let me maybe ask a more question. Does it at all worry you that the scripting language in Bitcoin at the moment might be fairly limited, and that
there was a question about Ethereum, and I did talk about.
Okay.
It's interesting. I think there are a couple things we could add to the Bitcoin scripting language that would enable a whole bunch of applications. And I think we should do those things. I think that there's little risk in extending the scripting system, and I think there could potentially be a whole bunch of benefit. So I think we should bring back cat. I think we should bring back op XOR. I think we should have a pseudo-random number generator opcode. Maybe we should have some ECDSA opcodes that let you do sign arbitrary data. There's kind of like a small handful of things that, again, I think might bootstrap a whole bunch of use cases that are either really hard to do now or that can't be done now. And we're seeing that like with the Lightning Network, right? There are a couple opcodes that are going to be software in to enable the Lightning Network.
We have time for one more question.
One question about the future. What do you see the future role of nation states in Bitcoin, in particular related to mining? Now that majority of the hash of the Bitcoin mining power resides with mining pools in China, so what are your thoughts around that?
Oh, I mean, mining moves around a lot, right? I remember when DeepBit was Russian, if I recall correctly, people were worried that DeepBit was going to take over and be more than 50% of the network, and now it's gone entirely, I think. And ghash.io got close. Now the Chinese mining pools people are worrying about. So mining itself is going to move around a whole bunch. I think it's a very dynamic market. There's no barrier to entry. You have some idea, if you're a hardware guy, and you have some idea for some way of doing SHA-256 faster, and you can get investors. power to you, right? Literally more power to you, right? And so I'm guessing I give a pretty good chance the Chinese government is going to stop deciding to subsidize Chinese mining power with cheap electricity and mining will move somewhere else. That's my guess as to what's going to happen. I may be wrong about that. I don't know, maybe China will decide, yeah, we have a whole bunch of hydropower that we can't use, and so why not let Chinese miners use it to mine Bitcoin. But I wouldn't be surprised at all if a year from now, Chinese miners are 10% of the network instead of 60%. I know there's a lot of talk among regulators about kind of know your miner, worries about miners as being a potential point of control. If a nation state decided to do that, I don't think there's a whole lot the miners can do to stop it, right? I mean, you're going to have a huge electricity bill or a huge solar farm, or until we get like personal nuclear reactors, which isn't going to happen. You know, if a nation state wanted to find you as a big miner, they will be able to find you and then regulate you in whatever ways they decide. And I think the only constraint on that is you can be anywhere in the world and be a Bitcoin miner. So there are lots of jurisdictions in the world. That's another reason why I think mining will probably move around is, you know, if a nation state did decide we're going to find the miners, put an extra mining tax on them or whatever, then, you know, the miners will just Thanks for all the great questions.